Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Grout, I have a few document types of questions on this SBM topic, if you will. I'd like to start, and I hope I've queued this up with the assistance of Mr. Lennon in advance. Under exhibit list number 32, there are a number of documents. I think the fourth document in is a white paper. It's entitled Discussion Paper. The ringtail number is CAN 154213. And that's what we have on screen, so far so good. If I could just ask you, Mr. Grout, to indicate what this document is, please.
Part of Pacific Fisheries Reform and implementing the vision, we've undertaken a number of demonstration fisheries. There's also been work internally to try and incorporate some of the information that we've learned and some of the key issues into a subsequent discussion of the move towards share-based management. So the intention of the white paper is to lay out some of that discussion.
And is it in draft form? Do you know?
That's my understanding.
Do you know if has it been completed, or has there been further work to your knowledge?
I don't believe this was completed.
And do you know who prepared this? Or was involved in this document? It's not a memory test. If you don't know, that's fine.
No, I was trying to think if I could recall who might have been involved with it, but if it doesn't say in the paper, I can't recall specifically.
Okay.
The 469.
The next document, Mr. Grout, is number 33 on the list of exhibits, the Strategic Plan for SBM 2009. This has a date on the top. It's marked draft, March 23, 2009, and marked as draft, and we can read it, but could you just comment briefly on that strategic plan? And perhaps I can help to this extent. I understand that there was a meeting that took place at about March 24 of 2009, at which some of these questions about the move towards SBM were addressed in a meeting. I take that to be an internal DFO meeting towards scoping on developing a framework or strategy for advancing with defined shares. I believe this is a version that was put out in the time of that meeting. And I'll assist further.
Well, I can say I wasn't the lead on drafting the document, so I'm trying to recall my involvement in its preparation.
And I'll just express to you my understanding, and you can tell me if this helps you or not. I understand that you were sent by email on March 21, 2009 by Ronald Katawaki, and you, amongst other people, were sent this along with the discussion paper I just showed you a moment ago. So it was in the context of a meeting at that point. That email, by the way, is at tab 32 of your materials, Mr. Grout, and part of the collective group of documents that were exhibit list 32. But I'm not looking to put the email as evidence, unless we need to.
Okay, and in terms of the materials here, I recall, I'm looking at the email here from Mr. Katawaki, who is the Director of Pacific Fisheries Reform. I recall the agenda for the meeting and participating in that, and it looks like the strategic plan for share-based management was one of the pieces associated with that process, as well as the white paper.
So the white paper has become an exhibit. If I could please request that the strategic plan number 33 on the list be marked as an exhibit.
Exhibit number 470.
Have Mr. Lund jumping even faster than before. PPR number 6 is the commercial fishing PPR. In particular, page 66 of that report, paragraph 176. That'll come up on screen in a moment. And the question here, and again, I'm going to refer to something without asking Mr. Lund to go to it. Exhibit 14 is a familiar document that reflects past reports and recommendations. And just for the sake of the record, page 230 of Exhibit 14 refers to something that's captured here in the PPR. Reference to the McRae and Pierce process, which led in paragraph 177 at the bottom there, you'll see the first of the recommendations in their 2004 report, which I take it to recommend an immediate move to implementing fully transferable quotas for the commercial fishery. Could you comment on that recommendation and the extent to which that has been fulfilled?
Well, we have not made an immediate move to implement quotas across all of our fisheries. I touched this morning on a number of the challenges associated with doing that. We've instead taken an approach to work with willing fleets and First Nations to develop demonstration projects to explore how some of these share-based management approaches might be adapted to salmon fisheries.
I have two further documents which I'll look to have identified as exhibits, but without getting into any depth. The first one, I'll in fact go to number 36 on the list of exhibits. This is, I take it, a workshop summary of a DFO internal workshop on implementing share-based management in the Pacific salmon fishery from 2008. And again, without reviewing that, I take it that's a description of some of the work and charting a path forward towards SBM that the department has done?
Yes, we were, it's an internal meeting discussing a number of the issues around that at this workshop.
And you were in attendance at that meeting?
Yes.
If that could be the next exhibit, please.
471.
I think my last SBM question, if you will, is just to make sure that we're thorough about this. I don't know if we've spent much time on this today, but in the policy and practice report, there's reference to the SCORE report and the SCORE process. And if I could ask that number 35 from the list please be shown. This is simply to ensure this is on record. Is this the SCORE report?
Yes, it is.
I'd ask that please become the next exhibit.
472.
I'm moving to my next topic, which is selective fishing from your perspective. We have heard from Mr. Curry and Dr. Hargreaves on this. I think some of my questions will focus on implementation from a salmon manager's point of view. You made reference this morning to the allocation policy permitting the use of TAC, or total allowable catch, to encourage selective fishing. I won't take you back to what we looked at this morning. Is TAC being set aside for selective fishing presently?
Not currently. In the allocation policy, it identified, I believe, a couple-year period for doing that.
And the allocation policy also makes reference, I'll paraphrase, to using allocation in a way that promotes selective fishing. Is that right?
Sorry, what are you paraphrasing now?
Is it right that the allocation policy talks about using using allocation to promote selective fishing?
It might be helpful to refer to the principle around selective fishing in the allocation policy.
And why don't I try to do that through our policy and practice report? I think I took you previously to that section of the report that set out the principles of allocation. I think it's page 29 from memory, and if we could go to page 29 of the PPR, please. And it's the next page, please. Thank you. This is the summary of it. You'll see the second from the top point. I'll read, over time, commercial allocations will favor those that can demonstrate their ability to fish selectively.
Pardon me, sorry.
So that was not a question, I appreciate, but you'll agree with me that's what the allocation policy sets out?
Yes.
Has that occurred?
In terms of working towards selective fishing, we've, in developing our framework for the commercial salmon allocations, we haven't made an explicit move to reduce or change allocations among the gears in the various areas explicitly for selective fishing purposes.
And why not?
What we've focused on primarily is around setting from the department's perspective, is on the output we're trying to achieve. So we're working with the fleets to access their shares of salmon, and when there's bycatch issues, for example, of coho salmon during sockeye fisheries, we're allowing the fleets and working with the fleets to discuss ways they might catch sockeye while managing consistent with our exploitation rate objective for interior Fraser coho, which is 3% in the south coast. So rather than adjusting the allocations up front, we're managing the fisheries consistent with the allocation policy, and as well as selective fishing, being able to avoid those populations in times and areas where they're present. We do that, for example, with a window closure in the Fraser River beginning in September for non-selective gears, and that could include gillnet fisheries, for example, that have a higher release mortality rate. For other gears that are more selective and can release coho from the gear alive, even when they're encountered, we have structured fishing opportunities. So we focus more on the output we're trying to achieve, which is the conservation objectives for the various populations, and provided flexibility for the fleets to work with the department on structuring fisheries that can do that.
Presently at the department, who has responsibility for implementing the selective fishing policy?
The selective fishing policy, I would say, is not one person that's going to be solely responsible for doing that. Like the allocation policy, the principles are guiding our operations in terms of salmon management. So in developing the IFMP, we've got an eye to those policies. And by we, I say the salmon team, but also the Fraser River Integrated Management Team managers would also be responsible in designing fisheries consistent with their policies as well.
I have a particular question that arises out of evidence we heard on Monday. In particular, there were questions put to Dr. Hargreaves. I'll be paraphrasing for these questions, but I think you'll have, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on Dr. Hargreaves' answer so much as on the question or the issue arising from it. There was a suggestion that Aboriginal fishers who fish commercially in the tidal waters of the Fraser are not required to have a revival box on their vessels, whereas the non-Aboriginal commercial fleet is required to have revival boxes on their vessels. There was an indication that maybe because the Aboriginal vessels, or those vessels used in the Aboriginal commercial fishery, are often also used to fish for FSC purposes. This was a little bit unclear. Could you please help us to, or could you please comment on this, and first of all, what regulations with respect to revival boxes apply to the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal commercial fisheries in the Fraser tidal waters?
Well, starting with the commercial gillnet fleet that fishes in the Fraser River, there's requirements in their license conditions to have operating revival boxes. In the First Nation fishery, economic opportunities for sockeye, for example, there would be a share provided to the bands in the lower river, Musqueam, Tawasin, for example, under their treaty, or one of the groups in the Port Mann Bridge to Sawmill area, the Stolo groups. Particularly in the lower part of the river, Musqueam and Tawasin are fishing with gill nets. They have a variety of different boats that can be used to go out. Some of them are small tin boat, kind of car topper style, right up to the larger commercial vessels, which the owners of those also could be licensed to fish in the Area E fishery. It's my understanding, and I may not have the length quite right here, but for vessel safety reasons, there's a requirement to be using the revival box for vessels, I think, that are 35 feet and over. And some of those smaller boats, it's not a requirement, giving issues around safety and vessel stability.
And your understanding, at least, of a requirement to have the revival box if the length is over 35 feet, would that apply equally to Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal boat situations?
That length requirement is applying in the Aboriginal economic opportunity fishery. In the commercial fishery, it's a requirement of all license holders to have operational revival boxes.
And again, a question coming out of questions on Monday. Can Aboriginal fishers who are fishing commercially keep bycatch for FSC purposes?
In the fishery openings that we specify for sockeye, for example, there are times when we also allow retention of Chinook in the commercial as well as in the economic opportunity fishery. In the licenses for the First Nation fisheries specifically, we're requiring all viable bycatch species, for example, coho and sturgeon, steelhead, to be returned to the water alive. There have been cases where mortally wounded fish or fish that were killed as a result of fishing have been retained, and those are accounted for and towards the food, social, and ceremonial allocations for the group.
On selective fishing, what is currently being done to implement selective fishing? What sorts of measures and management tools are being used?
Well, as I stated earlier, there's two different ways you can maybe go about this. One is you can make requirements in the inputs to fishing. So these are the requirements and regulations that departments set out that harvesters must do. Operating revival boxes can be an example there. The other thing we also do, though, and that we've been increasingly doing, is working with harvesters through their representatives to design fisheries that are consistent with our allocation and selective fishing policies, but are flexible in the ways they might achieve that. So, for example, in the seine fleet, we've done work in Area 20, which is around the southern tip of Vancouver Island. We've done work there to control that. It's an area where you tend to have a lot of coho bycatch, depending on the year and times. We've had different fishery structure in place. In some years past, we've looked at fishing on grids. So if there's high bycatch in some parts of that grid when the vessels are on the water, they've moved. In other years, we've looked at restricting the number of sets or effort in some of those areas to control bycatch. The seine fleet has looked at fishing off the mouth of the Fraser River in 2009 and 10. 2009 to harvest pink salmon. It was an area they hadn't been in quite some time, so we allowed a small number of vessels to go there on an experimental basis. We had observers on the boats to explore what the bycatch issues might be fishing in that area, and what we discovered is you can actually harvest fairly large numbers of pink salmon with very, very small numbers of these other species, which is new information. We've also looked at using fleets that have lower release mortality rates than others at certain times of year. So as we get into September, when you have more coho returning through some of the fisheries, we've tended to only authorize opportunities for the seine fleet or the troll fleets, which typically have a release mortality of 25% or less on bycatch species, compared to gill nets, which can be in the 40 to 60% range. So we've had fisheries utilizing the different characteristics of those gears. Moving into the Fraser River itself, keeping with the coho example, we've had groups, First Nations, for example, that have allocations of sockeye, but are fishing using gill nets, and they've switched to using, in 2010, we had Musqueam looking at a shallow seine in the lower part of the Fraser. We also had the Stalo group, which typically would prefer to harvest their allocation using gill nets, either set net or drifted gill nets. They were able to switch, and for the first time they were using beach seines to harvest Fraser sockeye. So there's a variety of ways that we've worked with the fleets to allow them to harvest their shares. On the coho example, the department's keeping an accounting of the various different fisheries and past efforts in the various areas to try and use a model to assess where we're at relative to our coho exploitation rate objectives, and we're taking feedback from the fleet on how they'd prefer to make their harvest.
My last selective fishing question is this: should more be done to promote selective fishing, and if so, what should be done?
In terms of the promotion of selective fishing, I think I see the way we're going as a focus on obtaining outcomes. And so the department's role will be clearly stating what the objective is, whether it's an exploitation objective for a stock of concern, or perhaps some bycatch limit on that particular population in some cases, but then providing the flexibility to the fleets to develop ways that they might access their shares of the harvest with those bycatch objectives in mind. So much more a focus on the output we're trying to achieve as opposed to restricting all the inputs. That said, the department is going to continue to be clear about what sort of mortality rates we're going to associate with certain gears for certain species and at certain times. And to be clear about that, we've recently included a table of those mortality rates into the Integrated Fisheries Management Plan. So we're trying to be open and transparent about how we're going to assess the impacts on the bycatch populations, but we're shifting to try and provide the flexibility to the fleets and First Nations to develop innovative solutions to access their shares while minimizing the impacts on in terms of bycatch, which are species you don't really want to harvest.
I have a series of questions, and these are shorter topics as we move along. I think you'll be happy to hear. The next to last topic area is on the department's consultative processes with the commercial sector. I'd like to begin by introducing some documents. These are, I expect, all documents that are referred to in our policy and practice report, and I won't be asking for us to spend much time on them. It's mainly a matter of putting them on the record in a formal way. Number 44 on the list of exhibits, please. This is one of the New Direction papers from June of 2000. I take it this provides, and it dates to, I'm sorry, it's exhibit, Ms. Grant moved the sheet too fast. Number 267, this is already an exhibit, thank you. And if I could just, I think if it's already an exhibit, I don't need to do this, but I'll just confirm since I'm partway through. This dating to 2000 provides an overview of the advisory arrangements that were then in place, as well as looking forward to proposed changes or improvements.
That's correct.
The next document, number 45 on our list, there was a process that led to change in terms of consultative processes, and in shorthand it's referred to by way of the group that put it together, the University of Victoria IDR, or Institute for Dispute Resolution. Then Professor Stephen Owen was involved initially in this process, I understand. Is that the report? That's
my understanding. Both of those two exhibits are background to some of the current consultation processes we have in place.
That could please be marked as an exhibit.
So 473.
Number 46 on our list of documents should be the terms of reference for the CSAB Commercial Salmon Advisory Board. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
If that could please be marked as an exhibit, and I will return to these things to ask some questions.
474.
And to not leave out other processes or terms of reference, I have two others. Number 47, I don't know that I need to have you identify this. I'll just point out, though, number 47 in our list is already Exhibit 342. That should be the IHPC terms of reference. Number 48 on our list will be the terms of reference for the Allocation Implementation Committee.
That's correct.
Before I ask you about some of those particular bodies, at a general level, I'd like to ask for your view on the effectiveness of the processes for consulting with the commercial sector.
What is the exhibit number for the terms of reference for the last one?
I'm sorry?
The terms of reference, I'm sorry. Terms of reference for this last exhibit,
Number 48?
I have not marked it. I'm sorry, I've overlooked that. If that could please be marked as an exhibit.
475.
Thank you. My question was, at a general level, if you could comment on the effectiveness of these different processes for having consultations and input from the commercial sector.
Well, in terms of the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board and Area Harvest Committee terms of reference, I think the structure of the committee committees, area harvest committees, are designed to fit with the 8 area commercial salmon fleets. Their representatives are drawn from those. They're elected using a secret ballot process, so it's an elected representative process. On the area harvest committees, they operate by majority on the committee. At the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board level, we're drawing in representatives from each of those harvest committees, and then also from the processors, the union, and the Northern Native group, at least when they are the Native Brotherhood of BC, at least when they were participating, as well as a ex officio role for the province, the requirements in their mandate. So that, I think that in particular has been a challenge for the committee.
Indeed, some frame that as a concern that because of a requirement for unrealistic or unachievable consensus, it can result in a paralysis that nothing ever gets done. Could you comment on that?
Well, I think consensus is a pretty powerful tool when you can reach agreement, or at least nobody's opposed or opposed such that they will, or nobody's going to oppose. The words I'm thinking here. It's a powerful tool when the group can reach consensus, either because everyone is fully on side, or at least can accept what's been proposed and not oppose it. The challenge is, as you state, when you have a more challenging issue that divides the committee, it can be a real challenge reaching consensus on the issue.
And I won't go back to the score report, but this is certainly seems to be an area fraught with the likelihood of disagreement. Is that fair?
So is your question specifically about the score report?
No, I'm using that as an example of a description of the extent of a lack of unanimity. But is it not fair to say consensus will be very hard, or if not impossible, to achieve on most issues?
Well, on some issues there has been consensus received from the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board. License fee relief springs to mind from a couple of years ago. There was agreement on that. There was even agreement to support that at the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee, but on other issues, you're correct, it's more challenging to reach consensus. Share-based management approaches outlined in the score report. I think there's 2 clear groups that were identified there, but there were elements of what they were discussing that they could all agree on.
Another complaint that is sometimes put forward in relation to these consultative processes is that they consume too much time and effort, and we've heard it put that this takes salmon managers out of the business of quote-unquote just making decisions or just doing their job and managing. Could you respond to that criticism?
Well, I think there's a fine balance there, because if you aren't engaged in these processes and you don't have discussions in an open and transparent way, you risk losing some of the accountability that the process were intended to bring into place. So we're trying to keep these processes effective and efficient, and we continue to discuss with these committees ways that we can improve what we're doing, but I think there's a balance there. If you go too far one way and there's no consultation at all, I think that takes you back a number of years to times when people were complaining about the lack of transparency in the decision making, lack of input on on some of the decisions were made. The department's moving much more in the direction of harvesters and others having an increased role in how we manage the resource.
In the last day or two, we've heard some people express concern about the lack of funding, and I take it there may be funding that for the CSAB process, for example, that may cover expenses but not remunerating people for their time and work.
We're certainly not paying anybody in our advisory processes for their time, so nobody's receiving an honoraria for coming. I know there's specific budgets for the Sport Fishing Advisory Board to carry on their work. The department does support some of the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board's work. We do provide for travel to the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee meeting, and we have picked up some of the expenses around meeting rooms and teleconference lines as part of the operation of the board itself.
Does the lack of funding impede the effectiveness of the process?
Well, it's been something we've been working around. I think it's been a complaint at times from the Commercial Salmon Advisory Board that it's difficult for some of their representatives to travel to some of the meetings and participate that way. In those cases, we've used teleconference lines and other ways to try and keep the lines of communication open.
And sounding like a long list of complaints, I think I just have one last thing I'd like to ask you about. We've heard the complaint that area harvest committees are not provided the mailing list of license holders, rather that sort of contact has to go through the DFO. Is that true?
Well, the contact information of our license holders is not public information. It's held by our licensing unit. When harvest committees want to get in touch with their license holders through a mail out, then they would work through the department to get a mail out sent out to the membership, and that can be done through a bonded mailing house or such to get the mail out done. And
am I right that that's a complaint that you sometimes hear, that from some at least, that they wish they could contact, whether they use the term their members, but to contact license holders directly?
Well, I think it's been a challenge for some of the area harvest committees to stay in regular communication with some of their members. The way that some of the groups have worked around this is setting up an association. So for example, I can use Area F, the Northern Troll, has worked through the department to send out an application to become part of the association, and they can provide an opportunity for people to provide their contact information, as well as other things related to the association's business in the mail out. So that's one route that people have gone to set something like that up.
And does the department approve of the content of mail out to the area harvest, to the license holders?
We do look at the material that's going out is submitted to the department for review before it's sent out.
Review and approval, I presume?
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, we're making sure that the license holder's privacy is being respected, and that the work being done is related to the business of the fishery.
Mr. Grout, I'm almost all the way through my questions. My last few questions deal with the conditions that apply to commercial salmon licenses. And I'll just, if I can ask you this as the first question, is it fair to say that the conditions are really where management decisions are put into effect in the main? The management decisions for a particular area will, not all of them, but in a large measure, be set out in the license conditions?
In managing our commercial fisheries, we're using a couple of tools. The license conditions you refer to set out a number of parameters related to the operation of the vessel and other requirements associated with the fishery. For example, maintaining a harvest log, requirements around species, harvest limits. We also are using variation orders when we open the fishery to set other constraints on the fishing activity.
Conditions of license developed.
We use a license condition working group in the department where we meet in the spring each year to discuss specific issues around the license conditions for salmon. And we have representatives there from fisheries management, the area managers for the fleets, our regulations unit, somebody from licensing and conservation and protection. So we use a working group process to review any changes we're contemplating for the coming year. We've also used this group to implement and discuss specific provisions related to our demonstration fisheries that go into our license conditions as well.
You alluded to variation orders.
As I stated before, the commercial fishery is closed unless it's open by variation order. When we use the variation order to open the specific areas where fishing is going to be allowed, set the times for the fisheries, species that may be retained in the opening.
At a general level, how much change would there be from one year to the next with the commercial salmon license conditions?
Well, we have some changes that are, I might say, are incremental from one year to the next, but we've increasingly been requiring additional actions around catch monitoring and reporting of catch. So we've added conditions. For example, last year we added conditions for the southern net fleets to, so this would be the gillnet and seine fleets, to hail out when they're going out to start fishing, which wasn't a requirement before. It gives an opportunity for compliance and auditing of submission of logbook information later on, or even if some of our enforcement staff or observers are on the water, they can identify boats that haven't hailed out that should have out on the water. The license conditions have also been very important for implementing our demonstration fisheries. So when you look at license conditions for fleets that have a demonstration fishery, we've made specific provisions in there for the amounts of fish they're allowed to harvest, as well as the catch monitoring that goes with the implementing that demonstration fishery. And if it's of interest, I can show you the specific provisions of those.
I don't think I'll go to that level of detail. What I would like to do is my last question on this area about license conditions is this. Our policy and practice report appended a set of sample license conditions. We now have 3 different sets of license conditions for the 2010-2011 season and for the southern salmon fleets, at least 3 of them. So I'd like to first begin with number 49 on the list of exhibits. If I can lead you and just confirm that I hope what comes on the screen is the 2010-2011 license conditions for the Area B seine.
That's correct.
If that could be marked as the next exhibit, please.
476.
And to ensure that we're not missing comparators, number 50 on the list should be the equivalent document for Area E gillnet. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
If I could ask that be marked, please.
477.
And finally, number 51 on our list should be Area H troll. Is that correct?
That's right.
If I could mark that, please.
478.
My last question, Mr. Grout, is to here and there I've asked you for your views on the policy and practice report and whether there's particular things you wish to draw to our attention. Are there further points you'd like to raise or clarifications or corrections to the PPR that you'd like to take us to?
There may be some specific points that I've discussed with my counsel, but it might be easier if I let them walk me through it later.
That sounds just fine. Why don't we leave that and they can cover off anything if there's further points. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Martin, I just have a couple of
quick questions. Just before Mr. Timber, who I believe is next. A moment ago, Mr. Grout, you said that the DFO is moving more in the direction of harvesters having an increased role in the management of the resource. In the document, tab 27, I've forgotten the exhibit number, sir, and I apologize. I think you have it in your binder. Yes, it's on the screen. If we could just go to page 22, first of that document. And I appreciate that you are not specifically the author of this document, but I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions. I'm just taking that statement you made a moment ago and just trying to put it into context. Under the topic of addressing conservation, it talks about the wild salmon policy and some of the objectives to be met. And then the last sentence says, these changes have the potential to intensify the already significant conflict within the salmon fisheries unless specific fisheries reform is implemented on an urgent basis. Can you enlighten me as to what was meant by that statement?
Well, I can do my best to do that. I did clarify that Mr. Katawaki did talk with me at lunch, and I did clarify that himself and Mr. Sandy Fraser had the leading roles in the development of this document. I think what's referring to here in terms of addressing conservation is a move to both with SARA and the wild salmon policy for increased efforts to protect conservation units. And that's going to drive the need for changes in how the fish are harvested or where. And one of the elements of Pacific Fisheries Reform was providing the fleets the opportunity to self-adjust to address some of those changes that are coming. So one of the linkages I was trying to make, and perhaps clumsily, was that with share-based management, it provides an opportunity for the fleets to take more take charge of the situation themselves. They've got a fixed share that they're working towards, and they can find the most effective way to do that. Where specific fleets may not be able to harvest that share, there may be opportunities for them to move it to others that can also harvest it, either more selectively in another commercial gear or in another area, or perhaps in an inland area. So really the paper is trying to outline a vision for some of these things that might be able to assist with the implementation, especially of improving the conservation of the resource.
And just on page 24, and again, just in the context of an answer you gave to Mr. Martin a few moments ago, I apologize if I got this wrong, but I think your answer was that none of the folks who are involved in the CSAB, they volunteer their time. They're not paid an honorarium. They're not paid any sort of stipend for attending meetings, as I understood your answer.
That's correct. Nor do we pay a stipend to the recreational or First Nation or Marine Conservation Caucus members that attend our processes.
Okay. So just in that context, in this page 24 under co-management, there's a discussion there about co-management, and then I think it's the last, I can take it to the last sentence. It says Pacific Fisheries Reform will have to address cost sharing in the salmon fishery in a significant way if a sustainable management system is to emerge. And again, if you can, enlighten me on what is meant by that sentence.
Well, I think one of the elements here is that the commercial fishery in particular, deriving income from the resource, we're looking for ways for them to become increasingly responsible for carrying some of the costs. So for example, in a share-based management system, where we're specifying a defined share that's being harvested, we're also looking for the increased accountability that would go with that. So we're providing some flexibility around that harvesting of that share, as long as the accountability mechanism is in place, so you're not exceeding that share, for example. So some of the costs would be around additional monitoring and validation of the catch, for example.
And when you talk about co-management in that topic, are you talking about some sort of formalized management scheme, or I'm still not clear as to what is meant by co-management under that particular. You may not be able to enlighten me on this because it's not your document, but
I think to go back a little bit, the discussion paper is intended to outline a vision for where we might go in the future and lay out some of the ways we might get there. We're looking at an increased role in co-management, but it hasn't laid out the specific framework for how that'll occur. Some of the other exhibits with the white paper, for example, are trying to further describe what these things might look like, but as I stated, they're still in a draft stage at this point.
thank you.
For the record, Mr. Timberg, Timberg, on behalf of Canada, and with me is my colleague, Geneva Grande McNeil. Mr. Commissioner, I've got 3 lines of questioning, which I'll just set out for you. I prepared sort of an overview of the commercial fishery, which I'll take Mr. Grout through to help explain the commercial fishery with input controls and output controls, to try and give a bit of a historical chronology as to where we are today. I'll endeavour not to overlap with what Mr. Martland has done this morning. I'll then ask Mr. Grout some questions that arose yesterday from the commercial panel. And then finally, I've got a few questions to follow up on Mr. Martland's questions from this morning and earlier this afternoon. So the first portion is if we could turn to the PPR with number 6, please. And if we could then turn within that to paragraph 62, 64, and 65. This is a section on the Minister's authority. And Mr. Grout, did you want to clarify this section of the PPR to clarify how the statements here with respect to the allocations?
Just one point I thought it was important to make clear, particularly as it relates to setting the limits for the fish numbers or amounts of fish to be harvested, is that when we're dealing with Fraser sockeye, for example, where the TAC can change quickly, we're specifying conditions that set out a share of the resource in terms of a percentage and not necessarily a fixed quantum of fish. So it's just maybe it's a relatively minor clarification, but that was the point I was going to make there.
Okay, and with respect to paragraph 65, sorry, I'm just looking at, you're satisfied with paragraph 65, Mr. Grout?
Yes.
Okay. And then if we could then turn to paragraph 169, please. And with respect to this paragraph 169, do you have any comments with respect to this list of implications that flow from share-based management? Is that a complete list, or are there other implications that perhaps should be listed there?
Well, I think the list is a partial list of some of the issues around share-based management. There may be other things. I think relating back to Mr. Commissioner's question this morning about the provisions of the allocation policy, I think that's accurate. The Pacific Fisheries Reform is setting out a vision for moving forward consistent with the allocation policy for salmon that remains in effect.
Okay, and if we could turn to paragraph 172, and this comment about the mixed support from the fleets with respect to share-based management. Do you have anything further to comment there?
We didn't go into a lot of detail this morning, but one of the challenges with share-based management has been looking at the wishes of the license holders and how they would like to proceed. on an individual basis, and then providing that information to the area harvest committee members and to the department to get their views on what they would like to do based on information they've got from their license holders. And to try and shed some more light on that particular issue, the department did circulate a survey in the fall of 2008. It was the second of the two surveys I referred to this morning. The first one was on a specific project for Area B, D, and H. The second survey, we did ask all of the license holders in each of the areas what their views were in terms of moving ahead with share-based management.
And that's the score report you're talking about?
No, it's not. There is a summary that I've seen of the results from the survey results, and it's the specific question, and I'm going from the top of my head, but it's something along the lines, are you in favor of your harvest committee working with the department to develop share-based management approaches for, and then it had a list of different species for each of the commercial areas.
So perhaps we should go to that exhibit right now. Let me just find that.
I think the results were shown in one of the PowerPoint decks this morning.
And to assist, that's the Ops Committee presentation at tab 29 of our list. I'll try and also give you an exhibit number.
Yes, I have it here. Thank you.
Should be page 10 of that.
So this was entered as Exhibit 468 this morning. So Mr. Grout, perhaps you can take us to the results of the survey.
So these results, I think I explained the general categories this morning, but in terms of what this means, in the second column, we have area in the first column, and then percentage support for demonstrations in the second column. And what you can see is the level of support varies among the fleets. You can see the two seine fleets, Area A and B, are strongly in favor of developing demonstration fisheries. The three gillnet fleets, Area C is the northern gillnet fleet, and then D and E are the fleets in the south. You can see Area C is clearly, when you look at all the license holders, not in favor of moving ahead. Area D has got a range, but less than 50%. Area E is, depending on the species, in the 47 to 53% range, and I think there were slim majorities in favor for sockeye and Chinook, if I remember on that one in particular. Area F, we didn't survey them again for their Chinook ITQ fishery, but for other species, split. Area G, again, a split of above and below the 50% mark, and then H was generally in favor, about 2/3 in favor of proceeding. So what these results do is help to inform the department and the harvest committee of the level of interest for proceeding. It creates challenging circumstances for the harvest committee representatives themselves. If you look at Area E, for example, with the fleet roughly split on the way to proceed, the harvest committee members really need to figure out if they can find a project that will meet the needs of most of their license holders that they're representing, or whether they should not proceed.
So to perhaps help us out, yesterday we looked at Exhibit 444, and I'm wondering if we could split the screen, Mr. Lund. And these are the maps that we put to the commercial fishers licenses, and we can perhaps look at this to help us make this real with the witnesses we had before us yesterday. So Area B, I understand, is Christ Ashton. It's the Seine fleet, and 71% is in support of it from this survey. And that's
right, so Area B for Fraser sockeye is the areas shown in orange. This fleet, when they're accessing Fraser sockeye, are primarily going to be fishing, at least in recent years, Fraser sockeye have later in the season have largely come down and diverted through the Johnson Straits area. So substantial amounts of fishing in area 12 and 13, if I'm seeing those correctly from over here.
Yeah, that's correct.
And then more limited amounts of fishing have occurred in some years in area 20. I alluded to some of the coho bycatch issues there, so there's stronger limits on the fishing that occurs there.
Who funded the score report?
Yeah, when I reviewed the policy and practice report, I did check, and it's my understanding that the department and the province jointly funded the work on the report itself. I wasn't able to determine specifically how much, if any, the funding came from the CSAB for the work.
Thank you. Mr. Registrar, if we could have Exhibit 444 back up, please. So I think you've provided a brief overview of the various fish gear types, and these maps then are the 8 maps are the 8 different fleets that you've talked about in your testimony today. There's a map for each fleet, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so when we're talking about the different fleets, we really can sort of understand that by looking at these maps.
Yes, the maps are just clearly showing in orange under area-based management where each of the 8 fleets is allowed to fish. So we've got 5 fleets in the south, which can potentially access Fraser River sockeye depending on the allocation arrangements, and then 3 fleets in the north, which are focused on northern stocks.
Okay. And if we, Mr. Registrar, if we could then turn to the Area G Documents tab 5. It's sorry, I don't have a CAN number. There was no CAN number for it. I'm going to be asking you about the number of license that each fleet has. Perhaps you could give a descriptor of, for the benefit of the Commissioner, the sort of the size of the relative fleets of each fleet.
Okay.
And here's the document come up. So perhaps before you answer the question, can you identify this document, please?
This document looks like it's information that's come from the department's website.
And it provides a list of the fishing licenses as of May 2010.
That's correct.
And if this could be marked as the next exhibit, please.
Exhibit 479.
And for the assistance of the Commissioner, can you just review the size of the fleet and how that affects DFO's management?
Okay. Yeah, well, for each of the fleets, there are a variable number of licenses that are licensed to fish in the area, and this is an outcome of area-based licensing that was brought in 1996. So we've got in the Area B seine fleet 168 licenses that are eligible to attend a fishery opening. We've got 355 licenses for the Area D fishing area, 393 in Area E. On the West Coast Troll Fleet, we've got 165 licenses, and in the Area H Troll Fleet, we've got 89. And can you explain if these licenses are being actively fished, or what the status is of these licenses in each of the fleet? When the department is managing a fishery opening and opens a commercial fishery, any commercial license in each of these areas would be potentially eligible to fish. So if we had an opening for the Area B seine, any one of those 168 licenses could potentially go out to fish, assuming it was either a competitive opening, or in the case of Fraser sockeye, where we've got quotas in place, if they had quota on their license, they would be remaining, they would be allowed to attend the opening. So you can see for each of these fleets, you can have quite a large number of vessels potentially attend an opening. In practice, we don't see the full number of licenses going out and attending an opening. We refer to that as active and inactive licenses. So when the fishery's open, we would refer to the licenses that are out on the fishery as the active licenses, and inactive licenses would be ones that are not out harvesting fish.
All right. And with respect to the 3 gear types, then we've heard a bit about the different mortality rates associated with the gear types. And yesterday we were taken to the South Coast IFMP mortality table, so we've looked at that. But from a fisheries management perspective, can you explain how the different mortality rates is relevant to the management of the fisheries?
Well, the mortality rates are important when dealing with bycatch. So when you have a fishery, for example, that's targeting Fraser River sockeye, there's potential for bycatch of the other species. You might be particularly concerned about coho, for example, or you might be doing a pink fishery where you're concerned about the mortality of sockeye that are bycaught in that fishery. Each of the different gears has different ability to release fish alive and unharmed. The seine fleet's using a large net, and they're circling schools of fish with the net and then pursing the net at the bottom. They're then dipping the fish out of the larger seine or the pursed seine net with a long-handled net, which is called a brailer. So they're able to sort some of the fish at the water, or they can bring them on board and sort them on board for the larger catches and release fish alive. The gill nets are using just to complete that, the seine release mortality depends on the species, but in the range of 25%. But we've got the specific ranges outlined in the table. In some areas, for example, in Area 20,
So perhaps
the mortality rate's much higher.
Right, so perhaps just for the assistance of the record, that's at Exhibit 445, page 59, and perhaps we'll have it up just so we're being clear. This is the table. We have gone through this, but I just wanted you the opportunity to explain the relevance to you from a management perspective.
Okay, so the main point I'm making here is that there's different, looking at the post-2001 post-release rates. These are intended to identify short-term release mortality, so likely to occur within 24 hours of a fish being released. I was just going through the seine in the south coast, which is this row, commercial seine south coast areas 11 to 29. You can see it's typically 25% in most areas for sockeye, and the same for coho and Johnson Strait. We do apply a higher rate in Area 20, given that it's more of a rearing area for coho. You're more likely to encounter smaller fish that can lose scales and have a lower survival rate. In the troll fishery, they're using poles with lines with numerous hooks and lures on them. They're hooking the fish individually. They can release the fish from the hook either at the water or bring it on board, release it from there, put it in the light or in the recovery box. 10% release mortality for sockeye, 15% for coho and chinook, so the lowest among the commercial fleets. And then the gill nets, we've got a rectangular net that's hanging in the water. The fish are swimming in and being gilled. Some suffocation occurring and potentially the fish being killed before they're brought into the boat. We typically use a 60% mortality rate, although we've used lower rates in cases where provisions are in place for shorter nets perhaps, or shorter set times or soak times, where the fish are more likely to be brought on board alive. So that's the breakdown in terms of the release mortality rates.
And are you aware of any work that's ongoing with respect to post-mortality release rates and long-term survival of the fish after they've been released?
One of the concerns that come up is a lot of the selective fishing work that was done in the 2000, 2001, that sort of time frame, was looking at fish that were captured, tagged, and then put into a holding pen and then assessed after 24 hours. It gave you a sense of the short-term survival rate and even immediate mortalities potentially. What it didn't tell you is once you let those fish go out of those net pens, what might happen to them? Are they compromised in some way, or do they swim away and survive? There's been some work that's been funded by NSERC, and I'm going to struggle with that acronym. It's a funding agency that provides money to researchers. It's a strategic grant. I think it's National Science Engineering Research Council. I might have some of the words off, but they've provided funding to some researchers from the department, from UBC. Dr. Scott Hinch is the lead there, and Dr. Stephen Cook. they're doing some new work looking at salmon migration and post-release mortalities under a variety of different conditions. They're using acoustic and radio tags to track the fish for longer time periods after their release up to the spawning grounds. So they just recently provided an update to the department and a number of people that have been involved in this work in January or February, and they're finding a number of factors can affect the release mortality of these species, including things like whether the fish was lifted out of the water and out of the water for some period of time before it was released, what the water temperature of the Fraser River was when the fish was released. So they're able to look at a lot of additional variables that we didn't look at in some of those earlier studies. So some of that work may help us to refine some of these factors we're using for release mortality in this table.
Okay, that's very helpful. And so just to try to make sure we're all on the same page here, historically the commercial salmon fishery was entirely a competitive fishery or a derby fishery, and I'm going back, let's say, to the 60s, 1960s.
That's correct.
And then DFO started to implement share-based fisheries using scientific licenses in approximately 2005, 2007.
Well, we're leaving a lot of things out there, but there's been a progression from the department managing fisheries and looking at various different ways to try and control the effort in the fisheries in response to declines in abundance in some cases. Area-based licensing was one of the...
Oh, okay. So sorry, I will get to my questions about input, the evolution of input controls. Just trying to clarify the process with respect to the movement towards the share-based fisheries just in the last 10 years, and then I'll jump back in time if that's okay.
Okay. In terms of share-based management, we've had some small projects with Area H, one of which started... we have a review of the fishery. I believe 2002 or 2003 was the date on that exhibit. Primarily, though, we've been looking at demonstrations as a result of the Pacific Fisheries Reform post-2005, or beginning in 2005.
All right, and then there was, and initially there for a couple of years when DFO was using the scientific licenses, you didn't have the policy of working only with a willing fleet. So for approximately 2 years, DFO was implementing share-based management without that requirement of a willing fleet.
In 2005, 6, and 7, we were using scientific licenses as a way to provide an opportunity to test share-based management for those vessels that were interested in that, while also having derby competitive fisheries in the same gear type at the same time. So for Area F, for example, in the Northern Troll, we had some number of vessels that remained in the derby fishery, fishing for their share or proportion of the total allowable catch. The remainder of the vessels were in the quota-style fishery, where they each had an equal share of their proportion of the harvest using a scientific license.
Hearing will now recess for 15 minutes.